Hello, everyone. Welcome to DEI, a podcast dedicated to discussing and raising awareness on the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Karasia, and we're thrilled today to have Dr. Delia Santiago Matarese with us. Dr. Santiago Matarese is the program scientist in the Planetary Science Division at NASA headquarters. She leads the Solar Systems Working Program, the dual anonymous peer review efforts for the Planetary Science Division. Dr. Delia also serves as a deputy program scientist for the Dragonfly mission to Titan. It is a pleasure to have you with us, Dr. Delia. Do you mind to start off by introducing yourself, your identity, and what you do?
Thank you so much for introducing me and having me here today. My name is Delia Santiago Matarese, and I am a planetary scientist at NASA headquarters in the Planetary Science Division. And I am half of Mexican descent and half Puerto Rican descent. Both of my parents were born in the US, but we have very colorful and amazing backgrounds. And I'm very proud to be where I am and represent my cultures in the workspace.
How did you venture into the field of planetary science? And have you always known that your passion is STEM?
I've always been drawn to science, but I would not say I always wanted to work for NASA, more because it seemed very in the stars, honestly. It didn't seem like a real career path almost. When I was younger, I thought, you might have engineers or pilots going into space, but I always wanted to be a scientist. For the longest time, I wanted to either go into human medicine or veterinary medicine. And so as an undergrad, I studied biology, but I came across a class that was an optional elective class on astrobiology and space biology. And I had no idea that the two could intersect. And from there on, it's been a wonderful journey where all of my interesting experiences have led me to where I am today.
Just out of curiosity, can you explain what astrobiology is?
Yeah. And so when I took this class, it was also less defined than it is now. Back then, this class was involving all kinds of concepts. So the concepts of what happens to human bodies in space? What about life on other planets? How did life originate on this planet? What happens to groups of people in space when, socially, what happens? All these questions where anywhere between where biology and space overlapped was kind of astrobiology back then. I would say more nowadays, it tends to be more focused. And in our planetary science division at NASA headquarters, we have a dedicated astrobiology program. And that's really focused on questions related to habitability of planets. So both Earth and what other planets that might have life look like. It could involve exoplanet research, which are potentially habitable planets around other stars. It could be how does life form, something called exobiology, like life, the science of, life evolving and life elsewhere or in extreme environments. And it's this wide range of topics related to the concept of life in a space environment and not just thinking of life as we know it.
That's so cool. And I'm pretty sure pursuing your interests in NASA might be like a special experience because you've never thought of it. Can you share some of your experiences working at NASA and some of the memorable projects or challenges that you faced along the way?
Yeah, so I've been lucky to support so many. There has been some work. So right now, I can talk about some of my favorite things right now if that works. I have the opportunity to support people doing research. So I help fund research programs. And I also support a few specific missions. So one of the missions that I support is the Juno mission, which is to Jupiter. And it studies the structure of the magnetic field and also the atmosphere of Jupiter. And it also observes a lot of the moons of Jupiter. So that one's super exciting and it's a big success. And I'm so proud to be part of that mission. And I also help support a mission in development called Dragonfly, which will go to Saturn's moon of Titan. And what's really cool about this is it's going to be a quadcopter. So think of like a helicopter, but with four different turning areas of turning blades. And it's going to be doing science and like flying around and landing on the moon of Titan. And so that one is really exciting as well. So those are a couple of my more recent projects, but I've had a lot of opportunities to work. I've done field work, I've worked in the laboratory, and I've done a lot of computer modeling as well.
That's actually so mind-blowing. Like I never think of going to Jupiter or like Saturn's moon. Like that's crazy. Um,
Yeah, one of the cool things is that, I personally like science fiction. I read it a lot as a kid, and I watched Star Trek and all these science fiction shows. And I really feel like on a daily basis, I am contributing to making science fiction science fact. And these places that we only hear about that are these abstract ideas that used to be little dots in the telescope are real places we're going to land on and have photographs of and get data from. And it's just really exciting to be part of that.
right. Like hearing you speak of that, it just feels like a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
Um, Apart from like those like experiences or projects, do you mind to elaborate on how your identity as a Mexican and mixed identity and a woman working in the STEM field has been a part of what shapes you, or you met any challenges with your identity?
I would say sometimes so I have not had a lot of huge, blatantly negative, discriminatory actions related to my ethnic heritage. I've witnessed more related to gender and such. But I would say the biggest thing is often just being not seeing people like yourself and the impact that has can be kind of hard. You can be at a meeting and you just don't see anybody that looks like you, and it can feel a little bit of isolate. It can feel isolating a bit. And it's interesting. I don't know if you've heard of the organization SOCNUS, but it's the Society for the Advancements of Chicanos and Native Americans in STEM and in science. And I've recently started going to their annual meeting, and it feels completely different. I didn't realize how much I was aware of being different until I blended in. And it was very interesting to just kind of relax that you don't stand out, if that makes any sense. Um, but I would say overall, I haven't had a lot of like blatant discriminatory experiences. But I think there are just some differences between the dominant science culture and at least the cultures that I personally was raised, where a lot of times I was raised to, just work quietly and put your head down, and maybe you don't advertise your accomplishments as much. And sometimes in the workplace, you do need to highlight your accomplishments and you need to ask for what you want, which in the way I was raised, that's almost could be rude. And so I would say that's been kind of a cultural difference. But so those are some of the things I've noticed as far as showing up in this workplace that's just so different. But it's also exciting to see that, when I go to these other meetings now with it, and even the mainstream meetings now, there's a lot more diversity, and it's so wonderful to see that, this science is for everyone, which it always has been, but to see that more people are living that.
Right. Um, with like those experiences being a woman and coming from a different ethnic background, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? And do you have any like formative experiences that affected your view of DEI?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I do think of those words as they're all very distinct. As so diversity, I feel like is it can be simple. Like it can be, wanting to see more people that look different, wanting to seeing people on stage that, in my case might have curly hair or that just look different than what the stereotype is. And so that way, any one individual doesn't feel like they don't belong. And then that relates to inclusion, and I would say that's the area where I've had a lot of different experiences. Like I would say, in my current roles, I generally feel very included and I feel very fortunate. But I've definitely had a lot of meetings where I look around and I was in a room of 15 people and almost everybody was, a different gender and didn't look like me color wise. And it's we're scientists, we observe patterns, and so when you observe that you're different, it's hard not to notice it because you're just observing the world around you. um, and equity is interesting because I think about that. It's a lot harder to access sometimes because you don't always know where people come from, right? Like you don't know what opportunities they've had or not had, and what experiences they have and what knowledge base they have. Like little things like I'm first gen college, let alone grad school, and things that might be obvious to other people, like, oh, you reach out to your graduate advisors before you apply. That's not obvious because you don't do that for undergrad, right? And so, like, to do that for grad school, it's not always obvious. And so, those, making sure everyone has, information to access to what I call like hidden rules and that type of stuff is really important, I think.
Yeah. Um, I can relate to that a lot because I came to China a a year or two ago, and there's a lot of like cultural differences that um if you don't know, you don't know. So it's a lot of blending in, a lot of learning and observing from others that might like need more. Like if there's a guidance in the beginning, that might be different.
Yeah, totally.
Um, so this is more on the DEI side of stuff. So how do you think DEI has changed historically, and have you ever given attention to it when you were like a teenager, my age, in high school?
So I would say I actually felt like maybe blissfully ignorant when I was younger, honestly. And I guess technically I am Generation X. So when I was younger, I lived in a pretty diverse area. We were in a military town. My parents were in the military. And so tends to be pretty diverse. And I wouldn't say I didn't notice or think about anything, but I would say I didn't think about the concept of like microaggressions was just something I never, I could never put words to it. And I would say the older I got and the less diverse spaces I entered, I started noticing things more. And I also grew up in California, which tends to be less. Um, I would say in some ways, like it has a lot of history, but it's also more open-minded about a lot of things. So I would say like blatant things like blatant racism is less obvious than maybe other areas, if that makes sense. Not that it's not there, but I would say it's not as obvious or on the surface. But yeah, the higher up I got and the less diverse spaces I entered is when I started noticing things. And I've always been interested in what would be informally called like DEI efforts or outreach and representing. Like I've just always wanted to do that. And I love talking about space. I would say, as far as addressing more issues on a more critical level, I after George Floyd's murder, I would say is when I really noticed that these initiatives really took off and that a difference was made, and that these are more serious and getting more visibility. And, people are realizing like, we need to deal with things now. Enough's enough. And, it was during the pandemic as well. And I think it was just one of those cultural moments where there was a flip switch and a lot more serious attention was being given to these issues.
Right. Now like working at like an organization like NASA, how do you think this kind of federal organization has placed emphasis on concepts of making sure that women and minorities working in the field are included?
Yeah. And as I was saying, it really tied back to recent, really tragic events. And our daily work is very different, right? We fund research, we fund missions, and but it's everywhere. And I think this is the concept that's really come through is it's really all for all of us to think about. In everything we do, are we promoting values like inclusion? Inclusion is one of NASA's core values. And are we making sure that our teams are inclusive and that we're welcoming of people? And so I've seen so much change in the past few years to ensure that principles related to DEIA are valued and included and integrated in the work we do every day. And so that has to do with our outward facing work. So, how we select grants, how we evaluate things, proposals, it's been influencing all of that. It's influencing how we have our mission teams working together and people getting training. It influences how we do our work internally and making sure our workspace, we have to clean up our own house before we're promoting these other concepts. And there are a lot of on top of all of those things, there are a lot of formal initiatives as well. So we have a lot of programs where we can support, for example, minority serving institutes or maybe non-traditional organizations that are not typically funded by NASA to do work. And so we have a lot of different programs that address, that are in that area that can try to address these issues. So we have a lot of different types of initiatives, both outward facing and inward facing.
Can you elaborate more on some of those like programs or initiatives that has happened or NASA's trying to do?
Yeah, we have a number, and I don't have all of them in front of me right now. Can you see me okay? Okay. But so some of them are to say for organizations that are not R1, which R1 would be considered like a research focused institution, or which could be, so it could mean maybe an undergrad focused organization or a minority serving institution. There's a lot of different official like federal definitions about these types of for institutions. Some of these might be to give them seed funds to start a research program so then they can apply for more federal funding to do research in the future. We have some where we're partnering students from these type of organizations not typically represented in NASA to pair them with mentors within missions. That there's one called H2O, Here to Observe, which is in the Planetary Science Division, which is doing that, and it's been a great success so far. And we have other, depending on different programs, we have different internships which are focused towards specific, MSIs or specific organizations to try to mentor people. There's also NASA's working on developing a bridge program, which is the idea is that you're trying to bridge people from different stages of their career to like be, from undergraduate to graduate and beyond in order to really get their foothold. And so that the idea behind all of these programs is to make sure that people who are often not included or left behind are not, and they are getting mentorship or funding or both, depending on the program, And we're also doing, like I said before, we do a lot of training and mentorship. Um, so that the people who are getting funded or an internship, like it's not just that, it's so that there are sustained relationships beyond that experience that'll help them grow and succeed.
Right. Um, Moving on to a few like more scientific questions. Well, it's actually one that I'm just curious about. So I keep reading and hearing that we're in like a space economy. Can you explain what it means and what the role of science plays in making economies like stronger?
So that's an interesting question, and it's not totally my bailiwick, but I will share what I can. So part of it is that we have a large commercial space endeavor. So instead of we used to have a few providers of launch vehicles, for et cetera, for example, and now we have SpaceX is helping launch, payloads into space, people into space. And when I say payloads, that can be like science experiments. And we actually just had a launch to the moon that happened earlier this week, and the launch was itself successful. There are some questions about the payload, whether that's going to actually be able to land on the moon, but the launch itself was successful, which is really exciting because we're having these different ways to get into space. And so it's not just the same few companies doing it anymore. And there is room in there somewhere where there can be science payloads on some of these. And I don't know as much about the specifics about that, but we are doing science in different ways and putting science into space in different ways than the past.
That's so cool. And before you mentioned that you had some current developments in your career, do you want to share some or like some fun projects that's going on in the moment?
Yeah, so I've been really lucky, as you said earlier, to lead the Solar System Workings Program, which is it's our largest way that the Planetary Science Division funds fundamental research within planetary science. And then I've also been supporting a couple of missions, as I described. Recently, I've had opportunity to step in for my boss, who is doing a detail at the White House, and so I've been stepping in as Director of Planetary Research for the Planetary Science Division. So that means I do a lot of things, but that involves, selecting the proposals that we decide to fund, doing overall broad programmatic guidance, and a lot of other things. But that's been a real honor, and I've been able it's another level of leadership exposure and to how we do things at NASA, and it's been an amazing experience.
Congratulations. That sounds like a lot of fun and a lot of new experiences.
Yes, I'm learning a lot, and a lot of it's stretching my skill set, which you always want to be doing because you never want to be stagnant in your career.
Yeah. Um, Thank you so much for being here today. It was actually a pleasure talking to you, and the information is actually mind blowing. Like a lot of stuff that you shared, I could never have thought of that's actually happening in the world. Although I know like NASA does those cool projects, but it's not like in my mind that a sci-fi movie is happening. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
being here.
Oh, well, it was so good to talk to you.